Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel again. And so in this video we are going to discuss about the article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, so let's go through the text of the article. एक बार हम आर्टिकल को पढ़ लेते हैं. So क्या लिखा है? That no person shall be deprived from what? From his life and what? Personal liberty, but except according to procedure established by law. ठीक है. तो बेसिकली क्या? It is in fundamental rights. What? It is a fundamental right that has been available to whom? To all person. That is, it is available to all person, whether you are a citizen, whether you are a foreigner. Okay, so it is available to everyone, all persons. And what it protects basically? The right to life and the right to personal liberty. So the two essential components are what? One is right to life and another one is what? The personal liberty. Okay, so right to life here means that right to live with what? Human dignity, right to livelihood, right to health, right to education, right to clean environment, and right to shelter. Okay, whereas the personal liberty means that freedom from arbitrary arrest, freedom from illegal detention, freedom of movement, freedom to choose occupation, bodily integrity. Okay, but then there is one important phrase, that is except according to the procedure established by the law. So the procedure established by law. Okay, let's see. What does the procedure established by law means? That there must be a law, and that law, what? Then there must be a law that prescribe a procedure, and if the procedure prescribed by a law is followed, if a procedure is followed, then the rights given under Article 21, that is right to life and personal liberty, can be taken away. Okay, now so Article 21 is available to all person. To whom? To all person, that is to citizens as well as to foreigners, that is non-citizens. And it is basically to protect what? The right to life and the personal liberty. The right to life means what? Right to live with human dignity, and the personal liberty means the bodily integrity, the mental autonomy, the decisional freedom. Okay, but there is one exception. The exception is what? The procedure established by the law. That is, if there is a law that prescribe a procedure, then if the procedure is followed, then the rights given under Article 21 can be taken away. Okay, so basically there are two concepts. Okay, one is what? The procedure established by law. What does it mean? It means that the court examines what? Whether there is a law, and whether the prescribed procedure has been followed. Okay, so in procedure established by law, the court examines that whether there is a law and prescribed procedure have been followed. It won't check the validity of a law. Okay, under procedure established by law, the court didn't examine the validity of law. Okay, whereas the second concept, which is from the America, that is USA, that is what? The due process of law. Under the due process of law, the court basically examine what? Whether procedure is followed and whether the law is fair, just, and reasonable. So basically in due process of law, the court can examine both, that is whether the law itself is fair or just or reasonable, and whether the procedure is being followed or not. Okay, so in the procedure established by the law, there is what? A limited judicial review, that is of executive actions only. Okay, whereas in due process of law, there is wider judicial review that can examine both the legislative as well as the executive. Okay, like in procedure established by law, the court basically examines the validity of procedure only, that is the executive actions. Okay, and in due process of law, the fairness of law, that is the legislative action, as well as the validity of procedure, that is the executive action, both have been checked. So the reasonableness or the fairness of law can be checked under the due process of law. Like if we take an example to understand these two concepts, so I will write procedure established by law, and here what? A due process of law. Okay, suppose legislature passes a law. Okay, and who gonna implement it? Executive. Okay, that is government follows that law. Now in the procedure established by the law, only the implementation portion, that is the executive action, can be checked. Okay, and you cannot check the validity of a law, whether the law is fair, reasonable, just or not. Okay, so there is protection only against the executive action and not against the legislative action. So, and whereby and due process of law, that is been taken from where? The USA, okay, and it has been taken from where? The Britain. In due process of law, you can check both the legislative action as well as the executive action. That is, the law passed by the legislature. That is, the law passed by the legislature must be what? Fair and just. Okay, it must be what? Reasonable. And it can also check whether the executive followed the procedure established by the law or not. So, even if the procedure that is given under the law is followed, the court can strike it down if it is unjust, arbitrary, or unreasonable. Okay, there was one case, that is what? The Gopalan case. Gopalan, basically he was a communist leader, and he was what? He was detained by government under the PDA एक्ट, दैट इज द प्रिवेंटिव डिटेंशन एक्ट. सो हुआ क्या था, जो गोपालन थे उनको गवर्नमेंट ने प्रिवेंटिव डिटेंशन के एक्ट के अंदर उन्हें डिटेन कर लिया गया था. तो गोपालन थे, उन्होंने अपना डिटेंशन को चैलेंज किया अंडर द ग्राउंड्स दैट इट वायलेट्स व्हाट? हिज डिटेंशन वायलेट हिज Article 19, that is freedom of movement, Article 21, that is protection of life and personal liberty, and Article 22, that is safeguard against arbitrary arrest and detention. So in this case, what does the Supreme Court said? So Supreme Court basically gives a very narrow interpretation of the personal liberty. That is, the personal liberty means the freedom from physical restraint or detention. Thus the Article 21 was interpreted narrowly. Okay, and the court said that you can be deprived of your liberty, the personal liberty, if there is a law enacted by a competent legislature and the process prescribed by the law is followed. That is, the court would not examine whether the law itself is fair, just, or reasonable or not. So it leads to a huge criticism that it gave what? An excessive power to the state, because preventive detention laws are the draconian law, है ना, and it did not adequately protect the individual liberty. And so basically what happened here, it basically allowed that even an unjust law can curtail liberty if the prescribed procedure was followed. So here in Gopalan case, if a law are made by the parliament, and or followed the procedure established by the law is valid, and the Supreme Court basically here gives the legislative competence, and it protect only against the executive action and not against the legislature action. Okay. So under Article 21, right to life and personal liberty can be taken away if the procedure established by the law is followed. Okay. Whereas in USA, there was a concept called due process of law. That is, the judiciary can judicially review the intention or motive behind the law or protect from both the legislative as well as from the executive action. Therefore, in Maneka Gandhi case, that was, I guess, in 1980s. So basically what happened, there was a passport act. So the government of India suddenly ordered that the Maneka Gandhi's passport to be impounded. That is, Maneka Gandhi's passport have been seized. Okay. It was said that it was in public interest and the reason was not disclosed. So basically the government refused to provide detailed reason. As a result, what happened? She could not travel abroad. Okay. So Maneka Gandhi, what she did? She approached the court, okay, and she said that my Article 21, that is, my personal liberty have been curtailed. My Article 19, the freedom of speech and expression was affected. My Article 19(1)(g), that is, the freedom to practice profession was affected, and Article 14, that is, government action was arbitrary. So basically, she approaches to the court, and here the court said that what? The personal liberty has a widest meaning. That is, the personal liberty means the physical liberty, the freedom of movement, that is to travel abroad, the human dignity. So here the court held that the procedure established by the law must also be what? The procedure established by the law must also be what? Just, right, fair, and reasonable. Okay, and it should not be arbitrary or oppressive. So before Maneka Gandhi, if there was a law and the procedure is followed, then the action will be valid. But so after Maneka Gandhi, what happened? After Maneka Gandhi, if there is a law and the procedure is followed, then the procedure must also be what? It must be fair, just, and reasonable. Only then it will be valid. So it basically introduced the due process of law. That is, now the legislative as well as the executive action both can be checked and both can be judicially reviewed. Okay, that is the case, Puttaswamy case, that was in 2017. That is famously known as the right to privacy case, where it was unanimously declared that the right to privacy is a fundamental right protected under what? The Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So basically, K.S. Puttaswamy was a retired High Court judge, and he challenged a certain aspect of what the Aadhaar scheme, and he argued that the collection of biometrics and personal data violates the citizens' privacy. Okay, so thereafter, a 9-judge bench, a Supreme Court 9-judge bench, constitutional bench, unanimous decision, that is 9-0, unanimous decision, and the court held that right to privacy is fundamental right protected under what? The Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, and right to privacy, right to privacy includes the bodily privacy, that is the protection of body, reproductive choice, and the information privacy, that is the personal data, financial information, the decisional privacy like the marriage choice, sexual orientation, faith and belief. Okay, and it was said that the privacy is intrinsic to dignity, that is without privacy individual dignity and freedom cannot be fully protected, but the privacy is not absolute. Okay, restrictions are permissible if they satisfy a test, that is a triple test for restricting privacy, that is legality, that is there must be a law, and the second one is the legitimate aim of state, that is the state's valid purpose, and the proportionality, that is the least restrictive method. Okay, so the triple test to restrict privacy is the legality, legislative aim, and the proportionality. So let's see the another case, that is what? The Hadiya case. So it was a matter related to a marriage and the religion. So basically there was one woman, that is Akhila Asokan. She is basically a Hindu woman from Kerala, and she converted to Islam and adopted the name of what? Hadiya. Okay, basically she fell in love with a Muslim guy, Saifin Jahan, and she later married to Saifin Jahan, a Muslim man. But Hadiya's father was against her decision, that is the Asokan came. So Hadiya's father or family basically put allegation that she has been forcibly converted and filed a petition in a Kerala High Court. Okay, that it is a love jihad case, and they filed a petition in a Kerala High Court. So what happened? The Kerala High Court basically annulled the marriage, and Hadiya was sent back to his parents. So thereafter, what happened? The issue came before the Supreme Court. So in 2018, the Supreme Court set aside what? The Kerala High Court order and restored Hadiya's marriage. That is, Supreme Court ने जो हाई कोर्ट का ऑर्डर था उसको नल एंड वॉइड किया, और जो हादिया की जो मैरिज थी उसको रिस्टोर किया, क्योंकि अंडर आर्टिकल 21 द राइट टू लाइफ इंक्लूड्स व्हाट? लिविंग विथ चॉइस एंड डिग्निटी. सो द राइट टू चूज अ स्पाउस इज अ फंडामेंटल राइट. ओके, so the court held that the personal liberty under Article 21 basically gives you the freedom of choice and the choice of partner, and the court also recognized that what? The right to choose religion. What? The court recognized that an adult person is free to choose and practice a religion of their choice subject to law. Okay, so basically the personal belief and faith are matter of what? An individual autonomy. So basically the Supreme Court held that the choice of a life partner and religion is an intrinsic part of personal liberty and dignity under Article 21, and no court or can interfere with the voluntary decision of a consenting adult. Okay, there was one another case, that is the Francis Coralie Mullin versus the Administrator UT of Delhi, that was in 1981. So what happened in this case? Basically it expands the meaning of the right to life, and it firmly establishes that what? The right to life means living with human dignity. Okay, living with human dignity, and nor mere physical existence. Okay, the life is living with what? Choice and dignity. Basically, who was Francis Mullin? Is a foreign national. Basically he was detained under the Kofiposa Act of 1974. Okay, and she was lodged in Tihar jail under the preventive detention. So what happened? The Delhi administration imposed some restriction on her meeting with her family members, the friends, the lawyer. So their meeting could occur only under the strict condition and permissions. Okay, so this issue came before the court. So the Supreme Court delivered a landmark judgment. He said that the right to life is not mere animal existence. It is basically a life with human dignity. Okay, that is, it includes all those aspects of life that makes a person's life meaningful, complete, and dignified. So human dignity is part of what? Article 21. So human dignity means that the adequate nutrition, the clothes, the shelter, the reading and expressions, the social interaction, the basic human needs. So right to life includes the right to live with dignity and the bare necessity of life. Okay, and it said that any restriction on liberty, like any sort of restriction on liberty, must be fair, just and reasonable. You cannot arbitrarily take away somebody's liberty. Okay, now we'll see another case, that is the Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India in 2018. So basically what happened in this case, the Supreme Court decriminalized the consensual homosexual relation between adults and recognized the sexual orientation as an essential aspect of what? The dignity, privacy and personal liberty. So it basically decriminalized the consensual same-sex relation, and it recognized the sexual orientation as an essential aspect of dignity, privacy and personal liberty. So actually there was one section, that is section 377 under the Indian Penal Code. Okay, so basically it criminalized what? The carnal intercourse against the order of nature. That is basically it often used against the LGBT plus persons. Okay, but the Navtej Singh Johar and other petitioners challenged, it was challenged in the court. Okay, they argued that criminalizing the consensual same-sex relation violates what? The Article 14, the equality of the Article 15, the non-discrimination, Article 19, that is the freedom of expression, and Article 21, that is the life and personal liberty. Okay, so the Supreme Court formed a 5-judge bench, constitutional judge bench, and it unanimously held that the section 377 is unconstitutional to the extent that it criminalized the consensual sexual act between adults of a same sex. Okay, and the court said that the LGBTQ plus individuals are entitled to the same constitutional protection as all other citizens, like the right to equality, right to dignity, right to privacy, right to expression, right to choice, right to sexual autonomy. Okay, so here what? The consensual sexual relation between adults was decriminalized. Okay, now there is another case, that is the Bombay Municipal Corporation versus the Olga Tellis in 1985, that basically held that the right to life includes what? The right to livelihood. Okay, so basically the Bombay Municipal Corporation decided to remove the pavement dwellers and slum dwellers from public street or footpath. Okay, so the petitioner, that is the Olga Tellis, argued that they are the migrants. These pavement dwellers migrated to Bombay in search of what? The employment, and they lived on pavement because they could not afford houses and their homes were close to their workplaces. So eviction would deprive them both the shelter and the livelihood. Okay, so the Supreme Court said that right to livelihood is a part of what? Article 21, and it held that no person can live without the means of livelihood. Therefore, the right to livelihood is an integral part to right to life. Okay, and the life means what? More than a physical existence. Okay, life means what? To live with human dignity, a meaningful existence. So the court held that these pavement dwellers, those who are living on the public property or footpaths, they do not have any absolute right to occupy the public land. Okay, the BMC, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, has right to evict them, but the eviction must follow what? The due process. That is, before the eviction, the notice is required, the opportunity of hearing is required, and the fair procedure must be followed. Okay, hence under this case, the right to livelihood have been recognized as right to life under Article 21. So here the right to livelihood is an integral part of right to life under Article 21, because no person can live without the means of earning a livelihood, though the state can evict encroachment by following a fair, just and reasonable procedure. Okay, similarly there was another case, that is the Aruna Sangve. So the Aruna Sangve case, that was in 2011, basically it dealt with the issue of what? The euthanasia, that is the mercy killing. And it recognized the concept of what? The passive euthanasia in India under strict safeguards. So basically the Aruna Sangve was a nurse in a KEM hospital in Mumbai, and in 1973, in 1973 she suffered a brutal assault that caused many severe brain damage, or as a result she remained in a persistent vegetative state, that is in coma, for decades and unable to make decisions for herself. So a journalist, Pinky Virani, filed a petition seeking the permission for euthanasia, and the Supreme Court held that active euthanasia is not permitted. What? The active euthanasia is not permitted. Okay, it is illegal in India. It is what? It is illegal in India. A doctor cannot intentionally end a person's life through a positive act. Okay, Whereas the passive euthanasia, the court recognized passive euthanasia under exceptional circumstances. That is the withdrawal of life treatment. Okay, but with safeguards. Okay, so the passive euthanasia was recognized and it was allowed, but the Aruna's petition was rejected. Though passive euthanasia was recognized, the court found that the doctor or the hospital staff caring for Aruna wished to continue her treatment and therefore refused permission to withdraw support. So a guideline has been issued by the court that before passive euthanasia could be permitted, if a patient is in coma, then the passive euthanasia can be requested by relative or the next friend, and it required a high court approval, a medical board opinion, and the final judicial decision. Okay, that is, the court required what? A high court approval as well as the expert medical opinion before the life support could be withdrawn. So in this case, the Supreme Court recognized passive euthanasia under strict judicial safeguard, and that laid down the foundation for the later recognition of what? The right to die with dignity under Article 21 in the common case judgment. So what was common case judgment? So basically the common cause case that was in 2008. So basically the common cause case that was in 2018. It recognized what? The right to die with dignity. Okay, the right to die with dignity. And it legally recognized the passive euthanasia was legalized and living will was also legalized. So what was the issue? So basically there was an NGO, the Common Cause, that filed a petition seeking recognition of what? The right to die with dignity, the passive euthanasia, and the living will. So basically the argument of the petitioner is that forcing a terminally ill person to continue life support against their wishes violates what? The fundamental dignity, the human dignity. Okay, so in this case the constitutional bench held that the right to life under Article 21, that is what? The right to live with dignity and the right to die with dignity. So the court recognized that dignity extended not only during life but also at the end of life. Okay, so right to die with dignity is recognized, but the right to life includes right to die with dignity in case of what? In case of terminal illness or irreversible medical condition. So however, the right to die with dignity doesn't mean it allow you to commit suicide, a right to commit suicide. This judgment doesn't legalize suicide. Okay, so the passive euthanasia was allowed, that is the withdrawal of life support. So the passive euthanasia was allowed, but under strict safeguards. Okay, and the concept of living will, that is advanced directives, is also recognized. That is, a healthy person in advance writes instruction about future treatment. Suppose in future, if any sort of terminal illness occurs, the doctor follows what? The living will. That is, the person can state in advance that if they become terminally ill or incapable of communicating, certain life supporting measures should not be continued. So I think we have covered the topic of Article 21. So thank you all for watching the video, and please do like, share and subscribe it, and bye.